Welcome back to Train Signal. You're watching Creating the Dallas Branch Office. In this one, we're going to be building a read-only domain controller for a less secure location. So in this video, we're going to be looking at the fact that Hank says that there will be a Dallas office, and you know what? What Hank says, that's what Hank gets. You know, if he's signing the paycheck, here we go. We're going to be taking a look at the Dallas OU and site structure we'll build. Then I'm going to talk to you about what is a read-only domain controller. This is a brand new thing in Server 2008. Very cool when you have remote locations where we don't have a lot of physical security. Then I'm going to turn around and show you how to build an RODC using the Server Core installation of Server 2008. Think of Server Core as kind of Linux for Windows if you want to. I know that's kind of blasphemy, but Server Core is a stripped-down version of Server 2008. It's very cool. I'm going to show that to you here in this video. So let's go ahead and let's talk about what Hank wants. Dallas, Texas is Hank's hometown, and he's got a ranch just outside of it, and he doesn't want to have to fly out to New York or Chicago to do work all the time. You know, that's not really a problem because, I mean, there's a lot of ways that we could give Hank access to the network and to the resources. But, you know, the thing of it is that he also wants a staff of 5 people, which haven't been hired yet, so we don't really know, who they are, but you know, he's already got an office rented out about 5 miles away from his ranch. The problem is that in this little office, I mean, basically we have a closet. And if we ask really nice, we might get to use the closet to hold our IT stuff. But maybe not, I mean, maybe since we're going to have 5 users, we're probably going to need a domain controller down in that little Dallas office. That way, people will actually have a shorter logon period. And that's going to be a big deal. If the domain controller they're logging into is in Chicago, and by the way, I think we probably will take this Dallas office and we'll put it in the na.globalmantics.com domain. If they're logging into Chicago, well, their login message has to go all the way to Chicago and all the way back, and that might result in some slow login times. So you decide that due to the lack of security in the office and the fact that we probably do need a domain controller, so that way users have a nice, quick login experience, including Hank, by the way, because if it takes too long for Hank to log in, guess whose phone will be ringing? That's right, it will be yours. So we're going to go ahead, we're going to put in a read-only domain controller. And right now you're thinking, okay, I don't even know what that is at this point. It's all right, hang on, I'm going to explain it to you. But before we can start building a read-only domain controller, what we really should do is create an OU structure for Dallas. So we're going to do that. We're going to keep it real simple. First of all, we need to have some OUs, okay, for our accounts to live. And we're going to do the same thing we've been doing here. We're going to be creating a Dallas OU. We're going to have a section for our Dallas users and Dallas computers. Remember, we always keep our users and computer accounts in separate OUs. So that way, when we're ready to do the group policy thing, it just makes it a little bit easier on us. Now, in order for the physical structure of our network to be represented too, we're going to create a Dallas site as well. Now, you know how to do this. It's really easy. A lot of this is just review. And in that site, we're going to be putting our read-only domain controller we're going to be setting up. But we need to have this stuff in place first before we start to build out our RODC and start adding in user accounts and deciding who gets to log in at the Dallas location. But first things first, so let's go ahead and let's go over to NADC1 and let's create our OU structure and let's create our Dallas site. All right, so here we are over on NADC1, and we already have our Chicago OU created, but now we need to create the Dallas OU. So I'm going to right-click on NA, and I'm going to go New and Organizational Unit, and we're going to create our Dallas OU. Very quick, very simple. And now inside of our Dallas OU, let's go ahead and let's make our organizational unit for users. We'll call it Dallas Users. And then, of course, back to Dallas and New. And one more for our Dallas computers. There we go. Okay, so now we have somewhere for our users to live at. Always a good thing. Now, one of the questions that we're initially going to have is, who are our users going to be? Well, we don't have any users yet. So I'll tell you what we're going to do. Let's just go ahead and let's create one quick Dallas test user. All right, so just a quick review on how to create a new user from, not from the script, but from directly inside of the Active Directory MMC here. And we'll just do Dallas test. Just something real simple, real easy. And we'll go ahead and we'll create a password for the Dallas test account here. And then as soon as Hank actually gets some people hired, then we can start creating user accounts. But first we need to know how to allow our Dallas users to log into the location. We'll talk all about that when we do the RODC. But now let's go ahead and let's create our new site as well. So down here in Active Directory Sites and Services. So now let's go ahead and see if we can create our Dallas site down here. We're going to click on Sites. We're going to right click All Tasks and, oh hey, wait a minute. There's nothing here we can use to create a new site. What's going on here? Well, I'll tell you what's going on. Let's go to the Start menu, Chicago Supercoach. This is the domain administrator, not the enterprise administrator. So what are we going to have to do? Well, we're going to have to create a new site on one of our major domain controllers. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's bounce on over. I'm actually going to take you over here to New York DC2. We're going to go ahead and we're going to create a site here on New York DC2. You know what? Let's go ahead and let's do this from client 1 since we already have the shortcuts created here. All right, so now let's go ahead and shrink these up here. We don't need to know what the servers are. We go to sites. I'm going to right click here on the New York sites. I'm going to create a new site and we're going to call this simply Dallas. We'll continue to use the default IP site link and tell it OK. Of course, it gives us this set of information, and that's going to be okay. We're just going to tell it OK. Now that we have the Dallas site created, now we can go ahead and add in our read-only domain controller. We do need to wait for our domain controllers to talk to each other. Of course, we could run the repadmin/sync all as I taught you earlier. But tell you what, while we're waiting for the domain controllers to talk to each other and get all the information replicated back and forth, what we're going to do instead is I'm going to go ahead and talk to you about what a read-only domain controller is, and then after we're done talking about it, our domain controller should have talked enough so that we should have our Dallas site hanging out waiting for us over in na.globalmantics.com as well. All right, so what is a read-only domain controller? It's still a domain controller, and users can still use it to log in, but the biggest difference is that it's just a read-only account. It only has read-only copies of the user account information. If we want to make any changes on or in Active Directory, we will not be able to do that from the read-only domain controller. Okay, it's just exactly that, read-only. Now, it does download in what we might call cache, and that's C-A-C-H-E, by the way, not C-A-S-H. It caches the user accounts that we decide as the administrators, okay? It does not upload anything to the writable domain controllers. And we will also call a writable domain controller also a full domain controller. So in the Chicago office, we have a full domain controller, but a read-only domain controller only basically allows users to authenticate. They can log in, but we can't really make any changes to the Active Directory structure. Now, here's the thing. When you have a branch office, okay, you don't necessarily need a global catalog on this read-only domain controller. When you have a global catalog in a remote office, that's going to increase the amount of replication traffic between your two locations. Now, in Dallas, they have a pretty decent infrastructure. They do have high-speed broadband network access, but even still, we don't want to be sucking up the bandwidth between Dallas and Chicago, which is basically how we're going to connect these two together, by the way. Because Dallas is going to be part of the na.globalmantics.com domain, the main domain controller that the Dallas domain controller will be talking to will be the one, DC1 actually, in Chicago. Now, here's another advantage, okay? We can use a thing called a server core installation to provide two really important advantages. First of all, a server core, you don't need a super duper box to run it. You can actually use a very small box that doesn't have a lot of power to it. You still need to meet the minimum requirements of Server 2008, but not much more than that. So it's going to cost us less to have hardware over in the Dallas location. And here the other thing is you can remotely administrate server core functions using MMC once you have it set up. Now, let me tell you something, that the server core doesn't have all of the graphical user interface. All you get is command line, notepad, and a couple of other graphical user interface items. There's not a lot to it. So if you're going to do server core, you're going to need one or two things. Either A, you're going to need some scripts that will provide the GUI, and I'm going to show you one of those scripts that may or may not be available. It's available to me right now at the time of the recording, but by the time you get this recording, it may not be available. It's called Core Configurator. We're going to start seeing tools pop up all over the place that are going to allow you to configure your server core administrator quickly and easily without having to learn 1.5 billion commands. But the nice thing is once it is set up, we can attach it to an MMC and manage that server like we would any other server in our network. All right, so here's what we're going to be building. We have a computer. We're going to give it a name, RODC DAL2K8. This computer has a 2 GHz single core processor. It only has a 0.5 gig of RAM, a 1 gigabit network card, like all of our stuff does, and only one 120 gigabit hard drive. We are, of course, going to be running Server Core 2008, the 32-bit version, though, okay? We're going to have a 32-bit processor, so we're stuck with a 32-bit version. Of course, I mean, this box, remember, doesn't have to be super-duper powerful. Now, we are going to be installing Active Directory Domain Services, the RODC version, by the way. This box will be a DNS server. So we are going to get a little bit of traffic, replication traffic for the DNS thing happening, because we want our users to have a good experience while they are in the Dallas office. And remember, a DNS server just helps us to find other computers and network resources out there on our network. Now, DHCP, just so you know, is going to be configured at the router. So we're not really going to mess with a DHCP configuration, but we will be running a DNS server on it. All right, so that's just a quick look at what we're going to build. So what I'm going to do now, everything else from this point on in the course is pretty much going to be the hands-on demonstration section. I want to show you how to create a read-only domain controller. I'm going to show you how to set up who gets to log in and who does not at the Dallas location. It's going to help to increase our security. And we'll talk more about read-only domain controllers in every step along the way. So let's go ahead and we're going to bounce on over to our brand new spanking machine that I just described to you, and we're going to go ahead and do a server core installation first. All right, so here we are over on the RODC for Dallas. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's click on the Install Now button, and we're going to go ahead and the installation process, quite honestly, isn't any different than what you would see with any other server installation. We just pick a different option. That's pretty much it. All right, so here we have all of our options for installation. You notice that this is the 32-bit edition, the x86. We're going to go ahead and we're going to install Enterprise Server Core installation. We could do standard maybe, but we're going to stick with the Enterprise just to give us more power. We're going to go ahead and we're going to tell it next. Yes, we accept the license terms. And now we're going to go ahead and do a custom installation. Again, nothing is any different, right? I mean, no big deal here. We're just going to go ahead and leave everything as it is. We'll tell it next. And away we go. All right, so again, to do the server core installation, nothing really different. So right now I'm going to pause the video while this guy finishes installation, and then as soon as it's done, I'll be right back and we'll go again. All right, so you see that we have successfully installed and restarted here, so I'm going to go ahead and do a Control-Delete. You'll see that it says Other User. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and click on Other User, and I'm going to log in here as administrator, but I'm not going to put a password. I'm just going to go ahead and press the Enter key because there is no password for the administrator. You see the user's password must be changed before logging on the first time. Okay, tell it okay. And I'm going to go ahead and set up a local user password, or local administrator password. Hit the Enter key and tell it okay. Now, after I join this computer to the na.globomantics.com domain, then what I'm going to need to do is I'm going to need to log in with the Chicago Supercoach login credentials instead of the local administrator credentials so I can do stuff for the network. All right, there we go. All right, so here we are at our server desktop. And yeah, there's no buttons. Look, there's no start menu, no my computer, no nothing. What you get is the command line interface with server core, and that's pretty much it. Oh, but wait a minute. If we type in Notepad, you can get Notepad. So if you want to do like some batch scripts or something like that, you can go ahead and use Notepad. That's not a problem. But that's about it. So let's go ahead and let's type in here help. Okay, now when you type in help, it's going to provide you with all of the commands that are available to you using Server Core. Now here's the thing. You could spend a whole lot of time learning a whole bunch of commands, and if you want to be a Server Core specialist, fantastic. Go to Microsoft.com, in the search box, type in Server Core commands, or go to Google. Okay, but you know, a lot of administrators, we don't have the time to do that. There's just not a lot of time for stuff. Like, there are some simple commands like system info, that will just provide you with the information about the particular machine and what's going on with it. A lot of your basic commands like ipconfig, yeah, that still works. So if we need to get a new ipconfig address or whatever. But here's the deal. What I want to do is I want to be able to I want to set this thing up really super fast. I don't want to learn a lot of commands. So here's the thing. There's going to be a lot of scripts popping up here very, very soon, if you haven't found them already, that will help you to configure your machine quickly and easily. And actually, I'm going to use a script here in just a second. I actually have it loaded up on CD, and it's available to me at the time of recording. I don't know if it's going to be available to you after or whenever you receive this recording. So the script is called Core Configurator, by the way. And since I have it installed, actually, or I should say I have it burned to a CD-ROM, I'm going to go ahead and go to the D drive where it currently lives at. Now, the D drive, as you know, is just the CD-ROM drive by default. Unless, of course, you have multiple other drives that are running around in your Server Core. And so let's just do a quick dir to see if it's there. There we go. So I'm going to go ahead and type in the MSI name here. Core Configurator 2.msi. And since it is a .msi file, I just type it and it's going to run like a normal item would. Now, I think what you're going to see here in the coming months as Server 2008 Server Core becomes and starts to gain popularity, we're going to see more scripts similar to this. All right, so let's see. Where am I going to put this guy at? I don't think I'm going to put it in program files. I think I'm just going to make it real easy on myself and put it in a file folder called CC so I can get to it real easy. And I'm going to tell it next. And tell it next again. And then tell it to close. And I'm done. So there wasn't too much to the installation, right? All I had to do was type in the name of the MSI file. Let's go back to the C drive now. And let's do a CD / to go to the root. We'll type a dir. Again, these are very basic DOS commands, right? I mean, some of these commands have been around for ever. All right, so here's our CC directory, our CC folder. So let's type a cdcc. CD standing for change directory, and let's type dir. And now I'm going to run the Core Configurator scripts. And now I actually have a graphical user interface to use for my Server 2008 Server Core. Now, keeping in mind that Server Core doesn't really come with very many GUIs, so this is kind of nice. It just makes things a lot easier for us. So let's click here on computer name. Let's start with this. This is the installation, what it gives to us. So we want to change it real quick here to RODC-Dallas and 2K8. This will tell it OK. Now, of course, we are going to have to restart, right, like every other installation. Do we want to restart? Yeah, let's go ahead and tell it yes, because remember, everything else that you do is based on the computer name. So I'm going to restart this box here real quick, and as soon as I bring it back up, I'll be right back and start recording again. All right, so the server has restarted, as you see here, so let's do a quick Control-Alt-Delete. And we're logging in as the local administrator here. And since our Core Configurator script is already installed, we can just go ahead and jump right to it here. Now, when you're configuring a Server Core machine, if you don't have a script, there are lots of other little commands that will allow you to do exactly what I'm doing here with this Core Configurator script. However, the commands are lengthy and might take you a little more time to learn than what you care to. So, in that case, you might want to find a script out there that is similar to, or maybe Core Configurator itself, if it's still available whenever you actually receive this particular recording. All right, so then we'll just open it back up again here. Core configurator. There we go. All right, so we've changed the computer name. Yep, there we go. And now we can go ahead and we can add it to the domain. But before we do that, let's go ahead and let's set our networking items. Right now our network section or our network connections are basically via DHCP. Well, this is going to be a server, so it's not really what we want. So we're going to go ahead and specify a specific IP address and a DNS server to use. So we're going to go ahead and make our read-only domain controller 192.168.5.70. And that will be the start of our DHCP scope or our IP address range for Dallas. And we're going to go ahead and leave the default gateway alone as it is for demonstration purposes. Now we need to specify what DNS server we're going to use. Now, since this particular domain controller is going to be attached to North America, or na.globalmantics.com, then we want to specify the address of the DNS server for na.globalmantics.com. One of the biggest reasons why we need to do this before we specify the domain is that we want to make sure that our little RODC can actually find the domain controller itself. Alright, so we'll tell it OK. And we're good. Okay, so now let's go into the next little section here. Let's take a look at RDP. Do we want to allow remote administration connections? Yes, we do. Do we want to allow connections from previous versions of Windows? Well, that we may or may not want to do. I'm going to go ahead and leave that checked because you never know. We'll go ahead and we'll save that guy. Let's take a look real quickly at the time zone settings. We want to make sure that we're accurate with the time zone, so we're going to change it because this machine is going to, remember, be in Texas. So we'll go ahead and we'll set that, and we'll tell this guy OK. Now notice that in order to make all this stuff happen, basically I'm just clicking on buttons, and it gives me similar things to what I would have during my ICT or initial configuration task list, right? All right, so we're going to go ahead now. We're going to make this guy an RODC, or read-only domain controller, by using DC Promo. Now, this nice little DC Promo that Guy Tversky has built for us here, it's very simple to use, very, very similar to what you would see during the regular DC Promo. We're going to be adding this to an existing forest. We're going to add a domain controller to an existing domain. Dallas is not going to be its own domain. All right, so we'll tell it next. And now we need to put in the domain name, so we're going to put it in na.globalmantics.com. We are going to have this guy be a DNS server, yes. It is not going to be a global catalog, though. Remember, we don't want necessarily to have a global catalog at every single site. If you have a global catalog, you're going to have more replication traffic, okay? We are going to make this guy a read-only domain controller. Now, notice that it's saying make sure to run AD prep RODC prep first. Well, if you were in a Server 2008 or Server 2003 domain functional level, you would need to go back and you need to pull out the AD prep scripts off of the Server 2008 CD-ROM. We're not running a Server 2003 environment. We're running a Server 2008 functional level, so we don't need to do this, okay? So don't worry about that if you are running a Server 2008 functional level. If it's Server 2003, it's a different story, okay? All right, so here we have the same file locations and all that stuff. We're going to go ahead and leave those at their default and tell it next. All right, so now we need to put in our credentials for DC Promo. So we're going to be putting in Chicago Supercoach, and the domain is, of course, na.globalmantics.com. And then we're going to be putting in the password for Chicago Supercoach. Make sure I got that typed in there right. And now we need to put in a password for the directory restore services mode. So we're going to go ahead and put in the same password we do for all of them. And we'll go ahead and we'll tell it next. So we see that the read-only domain controller now has talked to our na.globalmantics.com domain controller, and you see it's bringing up a list of the sites that we have set up already. So we're going to go ahead and put this guy in the Dallas site, tell it OK, And now it just gives us a quick summary. And what this really is actually an answer file that we could actually save out and use for another installation if we need to. But for right now, everything is A-OK, so I'm going to go ahead and run the DC promo and then just let this guy go. And right now I'm going to go ahead and pause the recording while this guy does his thing, and then as soon as it's done, I'll come back and we'll see how we did. Alright, so our read-only domain controller has rebooted here, and you see it's wanting me to log on as the administrator. Well, that's not what we need to do, right? So we need to switch the user, do the other user, and we need to log in as now Chicago Supercoach, because this machine is now part of the na.globalmantics.com domain. So we'll just do a quick log on here, and let's see how we did. As soon as we log on, I'm just going to do a couple of quick checks and making sure that everything came out all right. But once we're done with the quick checks, what we're going to do is we're going to bounce over to na.globalmantics.com. I should say NADC1, and we're going to connect an MMC to this machine. So that way we don't have to go onto this machine. We can actually remotely manage this machine like we would a normal domain controller. However, keep in mind that since it's read-only, there's not a lot we're going to really need to do with it. One of the things that we are going to need to do, though, is actually allow our test Dallas user to log on and connect, and really we're doing a process of what we call pre-populating the password for this particular machine. When our users first log into the Dallas location, we want their experience to be as smooth as possible. Now, under normal circumstances, if we did not pre-populate the passwords or the user accounts, what would happen is that the read-only domain controller would have to call up to the Chicago office, to the Chicago domain controller, and download those credentials. Well, we don't want to have our users to have to wait for those credentials to download. We want our process to be as slick and as fast as it possibly can. All right, here we go. So tell you what, let's go ahead and we're going to use the system info command here real quick. And system info is just going to give us, a real basic set of stuff. The biggest thing that I want to know is what domain are we connected to, and we are connected to na.globalmantics.com. The server that we are using as a connecting point is NADC1. So this is looking pretty good so far. Let's scroll up here. We got our machine renamed A-OK. And if we want to see what we actually have running on this guy, let's go to our little script that we had installed earlier. We'll do a cd-cc to go to that directory, and we'll just run core configurator real quick. Whoops, I need to learn how to type evidently. There we go. Alright, so now I'm going to go here to the features button, and let's see what features actually are installed. Now this little features button, again, different scripts are going to provide different interfaces for this, but you'll see that the DNS server is actually installed. And by the way, this DNS that we installed using DC Promo, it is Active Directory integrated. Okay, so Active Directory is going to handle most of our DNS stuff for us. I'm just going to scroll on down here and see what else has been installed so far. And it looks like that's pretty much it. So so that's good. It's only installed the stuff that we actually needed it to install. So go ahead and we'll click on close. And so pretty much we're ready to go. We are ready to actually start our process of connecting this machine to an MMC over on NADC1. So let's go ahead and let's go over to NADC1 and let's set up an MMC to manage this particular read-only domain controller. Alright, so here I am over on NADC1, and I'm just going to go ahead and log in here real quick. Now, I'm not going to use the server manager for this initially. I'm going to go ahead and minimize this guy. I'm going to go to the start menu, and I'm going to type MMC, and we're going to open up a blank MMC, and we're going to add some snap-ins here that we're going to use to manage that read-only domain controller. So here we are in the add and remove snap-ins box. Let's go ahead and we need to first add in the DNS item here. And let's also add in the Active Directory users and computers item as well. If we wanted to, we could add in sites and services and domains of trust. I think we'll go ahead and we'll add sites and services in just so we can have it But basically all we have in that particular location is we have Active Directory domain services and DNS running. So these three are going to be good enough. Now we could also add in computer management if we wanted to. We could add in another computer, or we could put in here RODC-NA, or where was it? Dallas-2K8. And so we'll also add in that computer management console as well. Everything else we can configure as soon as we open them up. So we'll tell it OK. All right, and here is our console. And if you've had any experience with 2000 or 2003, you know that this looks very familiar, right? All right, so here we are underneath the Active Directory users and computers section. I'm going to right click. I'm going to change the domain controller. I'm actually going to connect to RODC Dallas 2K8. Tell it OK. It tells me that the selected domain controller is read-only. You really won't be able to perform any write operations. Well, okay, that's fine. Now for the DNS, you'll notice here that we also automatically connected us to NADC1 once I connected to the NADC1 for Active Directory users and computers. So I also have access to my DNS stuff here, quick and easy. So this way I don't have to learn all the commands that are necessary for working with a read-only domain controller right on the box. Instead, I get to work with it from a nice, easy console. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to save this console here. I'm going to save it to the desktop, and I'm going to call this RODC Dallas, just so I know what it is. We'll save this guy, so now we can do any other work in the read-only domain controller arena that may be necessary. So we'll go ahead and we'll close this guy. And now my read-only domain controller stuff is right here waiting for me, easy to get to. And I don't have to learn a whole bunch of commands. Now, let me tell you something real quickly here. I could teach probably a 10 or 15 hour course just on Server Core. We're kind of giving you a snapshot of it, the basic functionality here, how to set one up, and the advantages of setting one up. But with all of the commands that are available, you know, we're going to have to kind of stop the scope of this particular lesson at some point somewhere. All right, so now that I've said that, let me tell you just a few more things about read-only domain controllers. We need to next decide who gets to log into the Dallas location, and also we're going to pre-populate passwords. Now, before we get too crazy with that, let's go down to the server manager for NA, and let's go into Active Directory sites and services. Let's go ahead and let's enable, remember that universal group caching thing we talked about in the last video? Well, since Dallas does not have a global catalog, we need to do that. So I'm going to click right here on Dallas. I'm going to right click on the NTDS settings. And looks like I may have accidentally made a global catalog, I think. I was pretty sure that I didn't, but let's just go ahead and double check here. Maybe I did. Yep, it is global catalog. So looks like we don't need to have the universal group caching done because it's a global catalog mostly on accident. Now I can go ahead and uncheck it and enable the universal group caching, but as it is, it's there. It's probably not going to suck up too much bandwidth, but I'm going to go ahead and go into the connection here and go into its properties. And let's go ahead and let's change the schedule a little bit. I'm going to decide that our domain controller is only going to be able to replicate. Let's go ahead and select all of this stuff. I'll tell it none. I'm going to clear everything out. And we're going to specify that this particular domain controller can only replicate 8 o'clock. We'll go ahead and set it to be 4 times an hour. Well, let's do once per hour. I guess 4 times is like shooting a house fly with a 12-gauge shotgun. So let's not do that. We'll do once per hour at 8. Well, let's see, what are we at? Actually, we're at 9 o'clock every night. Right? So that way we're not getting a huge amount of traffic for the domain controller and the global catalog as well. All right, so we'll tell that guy OK. Now, don't forget, even though we have changed the schedule that it's going to be on to replicate, we could always force a synchronization. And we can always right-click here and do a replicate now if we need to as well. So don't think that you are stuck, all right, once you set that schedule. All right, so now we have that specified. Now what we need to do is set up the users in the Dallas OUs that are actually going to be able to log in to that location. Now we only have a test user because remember, we don't know who's going to be in the Dallas site yet. So here's how we're going to get that done. We're going to go ahead and let's roll up our sites and services because we're pretty much done with that for the time being. Let's go ahead and go into Active Directory users and computers and into the na.globomatic.com domain. Now we're going to go to the domain controller section. You see here we have our two domain controllers that we built. We have na-dc1 and then we have RODC Dallas. This is the one we want to work with. So I'm going to right click on this guy and I'm going to go into its properties. And now here in the properties section, we're going to go to password replication policy. That's a pretty blinding flash to the obvious. It's telling us this is a read-only domain controller, and a read-only domain controller stores users and computer passwords according to what's down here. And only passwords for accounts that are in the allow groups and not in the deny groups can be replicated to the RODC. So right now you see we have all of these deny settings right over here. Let's take a look and see who's in the allow bracket. I'm going to go ahead and expand this here a little bit. Looks like anyone who is a user in the na.globomatic.com domain can get in. Now we may or may not want to leave this. Okay, I'm actually going to remove it if I'm really interested in deciding exactly who can log in and who cannot. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and tell it, yeah. Everybody else is denied. So we're going to have to make sure that we decide who's going to be in. So now we go down here and click on add. And now we're going to specify, are we going to be creating an allow or a deny setting? We're going to be doing some allow passwords here, so we'll tell it OK. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to make sure that our Dallas test user can log in. We'll tell that one OK. And now Dallas test user is now allowed to actually log in to the na.globomatic.com domain from this particular domain controller. So now when we actually do know who our users are going to be who are going to be logging into Dallas, we're going to need to come in here and make sure we specify each one of those users. Or we could also use the group if we create a group too. All right, next, remember how I was telling you we want to make sure that our user experience is as smooth as possible when they go to log in at Dallas? Let's go to the advanced button right down here. And here in the advanced section, you see the pre-populate passwords. So what we want to do is we want to go ahead and pre-populate the password for Dallas test. And of course, we would do this for any other users that we would be bringing into the Dallas domain as well. So what's going to happen is right now, na-dc1 is going to be sending the password to RODC-Dallas, and we're going to be sending that password for Dallas test user. Now, just so you know, you can only do these one at a time, okay? And this card probably going to be okay because, well, you know, you're not going to have very many people logging in anyway. Whoops, looks like I made a quick mistake here. The following errors occurred during the attempt to pre-populate. The account must first be added to the allowed list for this read-only domain controller. Well, I thought I did that. Well, let's tell this okay. And let's close the advanced section. You know what I didn't do? Dallas test user is in the list, but I did not click on apply. Yep, sometimes issues and errors are really that simple. All right, so now I can go back to advanced, and let's try this again. And we'll just do this one more time real quick. There we go. So don't forget to click on apply after you add your users, okay? It seems like a really simple thing to do, but it's a really easy thing to forget. I'm going to tell this guy okay. And now Dallas test user has been pre-populated. Access has been granted so that the Dallas test user can actually log in using the RODC down in Dallas. And everything's in pretty good shape. So I'm going to go ahead and tell us to close and tell us OK. Now, real quickly, let me show you one more thing here before we do a quick wrap up. I'm going to go to the Dallas OU and Dallas users, and let's open up Dallas test user. And here, in the password replication tab, and oh, by the way, before I jump into that, if you want to see what I'm about to show you, make sure that View and Advanced Features is turned on here as well. I'm going to open up Dallas test user, and I'm going to go to the password replication, and it's going to tell you exactly which domain controllers this one particular user is able to use to log in with. Now, of course, this user could log in with any other domain controller too. So if this Dallas test user was in Chicago, no problem. They could go ahead and log in just as easily there as well. But when that user goes down to Texas and tries to log in, they will be able to log in there as well. Now, if someone else who has not been added to the read-only domain controller, if they try to log in, they're going to be stuck. They're going to be locked out. Unless, of course, you have a global catalog or that universal group caching that I showed you a little while ago. If those are present, they can go ahead and use what we call their user principal name, or that email style login that I showed you in the last video. And they'll still be able to log in. But if neither of those things are present, only the user that has been added to the domain controllers like we just did if a user is not in this list, they're not getting into Dallas, okay? So make sure that you keep that in mind when you're setting up your branch offices, if you set up your branch offices, I should say. All right, so right now what we would probably do is we'd go and we would test the user account that we just set up. But you know what? You already know how to log in. You know how to log in a user using that email style login name, or the, if a user is part of the read-only domain controller, they can just log in like they normally would, just so you know. So, tell you what, I'm going to go ahead and jump back on over to the slides now. Let's do some wrap up and let's just talk just a little bit of theory, okay? So, here is what we have built so far. Okay, we've been kind of building all this all the way along. We built our globalmatics.com top forest root domain. We've built Chicago, and now we have added our Dallas location as well. But I want to go ahead and zoom in on Dallas a little bit. I want to talk with you a little bit about Dallas here. We have added this read-only domain controller so that users can still log in Dallas and have a good login experience. This read-only domain controller is really all about speeding up the user process and also providing ourselves a DNS server and all kinds of other things that domain controllers do, but in a slightly diminished capacity for security. If we were to zoom in on Dallas, this is what it would really look like. Now we have this Chicago site, right? Well, in Chicago, you're going to have a router. You're going to have a router also in Dallas. Now, in the Dallas site, we have this RODC Dallas-2K8, and users can use these computers to log in to the na.globalmatics.com domain quickly and easily, and have a good experience doing so as well. Now, here's the thing, okay, and I want you to understand this. When you have a branch office like this, and you have users coming from an entirely different site, users from even New York, by the way, can still log in with their email style logon. And by the way, it's more commonly called, I think I mentioned this to you just a little bit earlier in this video, it's normally called a user principal name. When you log in as J. Owens at globalmatics.com or H. Richardson at globalmatics.com, that's actually called a user principal name. Now, I know you already know how to do it, but now you know the official term, what it's called. Now, this is only possible if you have a presence of a global catalog or by enabling universal group caching. But in order to use universal group caching, though, you have to put your users in a universal group, and I've already shown you how to do that as well. So even though we have this separate section and that's kind of restrictive, if that global catalog is in place, your users are in a universal group, and universal group caching is enabled on the Dallas site, which in our instance, you remember how I told you that I accidentally, quote unquote, enabled the global catalog? Well, it's kind of sort of on accident, kind of sort of not. But but regardless, when you have either one of those two things present, your users can still log in even if their accounts live up in New York. Okay? All right, so now we have kind of an idea of what that's all about. Let's talk about some words. RODC, remember, is a read-only domain controller. It is a domain controller that only caches user account information for a small amount of users for a very particular location. Okay? Server Core is a version of Server 2008 that has only a command line interface. Server Core only supports 9 server roles. Okay? And one of those roles is a domain controller. And specifically, you're probably going to see a read-only domain controller being used in that situation most often. And I've given you a new word, user principal name, even though it's a concept that we learned last video. But the user principal name is an email style login name that can be used to log in across domains when a global catalog is present at the site or when the user is part of a universal group and universal group caching is enabled on the site. You know how to do that as well. Okay, so what should we be able to do after viewing this video now? Well, now you should be able to install Server 2008 as a server core installation. And also I've shown you how to use a configuration script to configure basic settings for your server core installation. Now, keep in mind that as time goes on, we're going to see more and more configuration scripts starting to pop up for server core. I just shown you one, Core Configurator by Guy Tabarowski. By the time you get this video, there may be several dozen out there that will help you out in this regard. I've shown you how to use that script to install Active Directory domain services with the RODC option. And again, if you have a configuration script, it makes it really super easy. You don't have to learn a huge amount of commands. I've also shown you how to attach an MMC to a server core installation so you can manage it remotely on a full server, or really a full domain controller installation. I've shown you how to configure universal group caching so you don't have to provide a global catalog for your site, even though we really didn't do that, but you saw universal group caching, all it is a checkbox. That's all it is. Really super easy to configure. Also, I've shown you how to set up which users can log in at a particular location or a particular site that has a read-only domain controller. And remember, whenever you're setting that up, you go to Active Directory Users and Computers and the Domain Controllers, okay? And then you go into the Domain Controller Properties for whatever your RODC happens to be. I've also shown you how to pre-populate passwords for users that are going to be logging in at that location so that when the first time they log in, they're going to have a faster and nicer experience. And by the way, that does translate into brownie points for you as the IT guy or gal, okay? If users have to wait 5 or 10 minutes to log in, they're not going to be happy with you, all right? So use that pre-populate password option I showed you so that users will have a nice, easy login experience. Okay, so that wraps up this video on Server Core Introduction and also read-only domain controllers. So stick around and I will see you in the next video.